What's up, guys? I wanted to discuss with you today the Jim Lill preamp video that's been going viral. I really liked his microphone video from the past, but this one missed the mark in a lot of ways, and I'm going to tell you with scientific clarity the ways that his methods could have been better. I've seen a lot of response videos so far, but none of them that really touched on the level of detail that I'm about to go into it with you guys. Alright, so the first major flaw is going to be when you use the focusrite to capture the Neve sound. When you're trying to compare the two things, but you have the focusrite that's on all the time, coloring the sound. In these sound examples, it didn't sound that great, and it sounded really noisy at the end of the clips. And that's because of the focusrite being present in both the Neve and that recording. Jim used the plug-in Doctor compression module, which sends a 1K tone louder and louder. The only thing is that for measuring an actual compressor and the threshold of that might work. However, on this case, you need complex material to trigger the hysteresis and the metallic memory of the transformer to be able to get that Neve rounded sound. When you put higher frequencies in, like a 1K or a 20K, it's not going to actually affect the sound very much at all. But once you get into lower frequencies, 100 hertz, 50 hertz, that's where you're going to see a lot of the big difference with the Neve sound. And when you have a complex waveform that has harmonics from 100 all the way up to the top, then you're going to see a lot more difference, and that's also going to affect the slew rate and everything like that. With the slew rate measurements that he did with the 20K tone, I see the thought process on why that would make sense. However, in professional testing, they'll usually do complex waveforms overlapped over each other, maybe like a 7K and a 10K or something like that. And once you get those two overlapping frequencies hitting each other, that makes the slope of that even as fast as a 20K wave or faster. And the shape of a waveform also affects the way that we hear it in terms of synthesizers. We hear a big difference between a square wave bass and a sine wave bass. And some of the harmonics that we don't hear can make our sound more like a square wave than a rounded sine wave. Alright, so now on to my testing. We're going to look at the waveforms, we're going to look at an oscilloscope, and we'll also get to hear the difference. So let's take a look over on the screen. Alright, so this guy Jim, he made this video about Neve preamps and comparing them to a Focusrite, and here's a little response to his video. In his video, he claims that the Neve does not affect the transient response or compress the audio, which was a shocking claim to me because that was kind of how I would hear the unit sound. So I recorded the kick drum through the Neve, and then I also looped it back so it was just only being processed by the converter out and then back into itself. Then I lined up these two recordings and I normalized them. Alright, so this top one here is the clean converter only kick drum, and this bottom one here is processed through the Neve. They're both normalized to peak -5. So when I drag them down, we actually see this difference on the peaks. Now, right now what we're seeing is the clean converter one is coming up a little bit higher on these. Now, that could be a volume level discrepancy, I guess. So, even though it's normalized. Okay, let's adjust the amplitude of the Neve signal to see if we can line it up closer than the normalization. So, when looking at this peak here, when I turn it until it matches that, this peak over here is actually quite a bit larger on the Neve signal. But then when I align that back peak, you can see that on the onset of these notes, the Neve is actually quieter, meaning that there is actually compression within these peaks, and the transients are not the exact same. What I find interesting is that in the first half of the kick drum, when the frequency is higher, it's crushed a little bit more, and when the frequency is lower here in the later half of the kick drum, then it is actually higher on the Neve, which goes to show its quality of being warmer. All right, let's hear the clean kick drum. Now Neve, clean. Neve. The Neve sounds a little darker, fatter in the low end. The clean has more of a bright attack to it. Okay, so what I did here is I have FabFilter Pro Q, and I did the EQ match by comparing the two signals, and this was the difference that it came up with. So let's hear the Neve, and then let's hear the clean with the EQ match to see how similar they sound. Neve, clean with EQ match. Neve, clean. So I still hear a difference. The Neve low end feels a little bit smoother, more defined. The clean one still has a little more bright attack to it. Now let's phase invert the clean one, and let's see if they cancel out. All right, so now let's flip the phase of the two combined. Now back in phase, out of phase. The high frequencies that we hear are the difference. Probably the highs from the clean one that are preserved. All right, now let's hear with the FabFilter Pro Q EQ match turned on and see if they phase cancel now. They don't. Okay, now I have them normalized by RMS. Let's see if they phase cancel now. They do not. Okay, so what I did here is I took the kick and made sure it was mono, then sent it out through outputs 5 and 6. 5 looped back into itself clean, and 6 is the Neve on the kick drum. So then after that, it comes back in on the return track, and we have the Melda Stereoscope open here, which will compare the left and right differences and see what's going on there to this mono signal that I gain matched as close as I could. Here you can see this line drifting like a comet to the right side at the end of the kick, and that's partly because of the transformer saturation creating sag. Okay, so what we can see there is that line drifting off like a comet to the right side. That's showing the extra length and low frequencies that we're getting out of the transformer. Because the transformer is saturating, it actually rings on and delays the low frequencies, and that's why they're extending longer. Now, if we go into the Kirchhoff, we could compare the sounds as well. Clean, Neve, then them summed together, and the sides of what is opposite between the two. All right, now let's hear with a full mix and see what that difference is. Let's hear the clean. Now the Neve. The clean. And the Neve. Okay, I definitely hear a difference with more low-end thump in the kick drum and a little bit of a smoother less high frequency sound in the Neve. Now let's hear them sum together. Back to clean. The sum. Now let's hear the difference. The sum. The difference. What's interesting is that you can hear the bass guitar in the sum really jump out of the mix. And in the difference, you barely hear the bass guitar. In the difference, you hear a lot of the cymbals, a lot of the high frequency stuff, and you hear a little bit more of the transients of the drums, as opposed to when you hear the sum together, everything feels thick and round. All right, well, thanks for tuning in and getting geeky with me. Hope you enjoyed. I'm Tommy Riot, and I hope that this sheds a little light on the Jim Lill situation, and I hope that my response video got a little bit deeper than some of the other people's. So thanks for tuning in, and catch you next time. Tommy Riot, out.